Welcome back to One Photo Revisited. That's right, this is a series I started in 2021. I think the last episode we did of this was in December of 2021. It's about time we did another one of these, I think. So, we're going to revisit one of my favorite pinhole exposures. And this was made in 1997. On a large box camera. It's an 8-inch by 8-inch format camera. This print was a contact print from the paper negative onto Forte polywarm tone paper, which is a paper that was made in Europe. It's no longer in manufacture. It was a beloved paper by a lot of people that do darkroom work. So this is an 11 by 14 inch sheet, and it is contact printed as an 8-inch square negative with a slight black border around the negative. This was basically a thick sheet of 1/4-inch plate glass that I used to sandwich the paper negative to the print paper. So the subject is Casa Rinconada in Chaco Canyon in northwest New Mexico. And so this is an ancient dwelling site that dates back to about the year 1000 or 1100 AD. So these people that lived here were the ancestors of the Pueblo people in New Mexico. So the structure here is basically stonework stacked up with maybe some mortar on it. And higher up in the structure, it is a multi-level structure. Higher up on the structure are wooden beams, so they had like wooden floors or ceilings. If you consider how desolate northwestern New Mexico was, they hauled these wooden beams from many miles away, probably 50 to 100 miles away. The composition is focused on this kind of V-shaped edge of the front face of this stone wall, and then this edge up here that goes up into the diagonal into the upper left also. And then of course you have this rectangular window opening looking to the sky. The upper right corner, the shadows of the structure recede off into darkness, and then up in the very left corner is a little hint of the sky also. Now, keeping in mind the nature of the camera that I use to record this image, aiming the camera is a very difficult and approximate process. So if I had to do this picture over again, I would have liked to probably have a little bit more of the sky here, like where you know there's a roof line or an edge up here, and you have a more well-defined sky to make a counterbalance to the window, and maybe this shiny rock here to make like a line of white spots, if you will. So this is just a little bit too small of a corner. It looks too haphazard. It should be either completely black, or that is with stonework, or it should be a bigger window opening. At least that's my reading of the composition. But I do like the composition overall. I like the tones, the moody tones, the way I printed it on this wonderful paper. I like the way the shadows fade off dark to dark here. Like all photo paper, almost all photo paper, it is orthochromatic, or that is to say it's not sensitive to red. It's really sensitive to ultraviolet and blue and a little bit of green, depending on if it's multi-grade paper or not. This is the reason why you have these white skies. So the sky on this day was blue, but because it's so rich in ultraviolet light and blue light, it's going to overexpose the paper. So if you underexposed the image enough to get a normal looking darker gray blue sky, then the foreground of these warm-toned rocks would be almost completely black. And this relates back to 19th century photography of Native Americans, where a lot of the plate cameras were using emulsions that were orthochromatic, and you'll see this very similar look in the pictures of the New Mexico Pueblos from the 19th century. The skies had this completely white, blown-out look, and the skin tones of the subjects were darker than they normally are because the emulsion on the plates was only sensitive to blue and UV light. There is some referencing, I would say, to the 19th century photographic images of the early American Western experience, based on just the fact that the tonal range of this paper negative is similar in response. This is one of my more pleasing images. I really enjoy this, and I just like the whole kind of dynamic of the way the structure looks and the moody tones, given the fact that it's not a perfect composition. Since we're talking about the composition, this is a good time to segue into specifics of the camera itself, how it worked, and why it has these kinds of aiming compositional limitations. Well, this is the 8" by 8" format box camera set up on the homemade tripod. It's f/458. The shutter on the camera is a pull shutter. It pulls open like that. It supports itself open, and then you just push it closed like that. Very simple and effective. Loading the paper into the camera. So this camera is a falling plate camera. It holds up to 8 sheets of paper as it's configured now. So there is a pin that you pull on both sides of the back. There's one on this side, one on the opposite side. When you pull both pins out, the film back comes out entirely. And on the back of the camera is a set of springs enabling the back to push against the film plates and keep them nicely pressed in place. Each film plate is a piece of mat board, and it has a pocket in here. You put an 8 by 10 sheet of photo paper in it. The top and bottom inch is tucked under the pockets here, leading to an 8" square open image area. And the key feature of these film plates is there's a series of notches. There's 2 notches on each side, and the film plates are staggered in the notch arrangement. So there is a hole, 2 holes, one on each bottom corner, and they sit into these brass rods. So they're supported like this. And there's a series of knobs on either side, on both sides of the box, that operate the falling plate mechanism. On each side of the camera there is a set of brass pins, and they're operated by the knob on the side of the box here. And so these brass pins interact with the notches on the side of the film holder to cause the front film holder to drop whenever you move both of them up or down accordingly. So here I've put in the number 1 film holder. The notches on this film holder are in the up position. The pins are currently in the down position. So now if I take both of the side pins and pull them up, you can see the falling plate. It falls down to the bottom of the camera, and this gives room for the second film holder, number 2, is ready to be exposed, and when it's ready to be dropped, you pull the pins back down and it falls accordingly, and the rest of the film holders fall like that, alternating even, odd, up, down, up, down, up, down. The tripod itself weighs only 5 pounds, which is quite a bit lighter than a standard aluminum tripod that would be capable of carrying a similar weight. The cord loop on the legs is pulled tight to stabilize the tripod, but it can slip between all 3 eyelets. So you can actually make the triangle more like isosceles, and this tends to point the head up a little bit, or you can make it a more acute triangle like that, and that tends to point the head down. And then in addition to that, you can move the leg, the middle leg, side to side to try to level the head side to side to compensate for the unevenness of the ground. So the leg system with this loop of cord stabilizes the tripod into a tetrahedron and enables you to level it to the ground. And then the head on top with the adjustable tilt just gives you that much more adjustability. And then the bottoms of all 3 legs have these angle brackets mounted on the bottom corner to reinforce it and to provide a wear point. So instead of wearing down the wooden legs on the hard terrain, you're going to wear down these metal brackets, and when it comes time to replace them, you just pull out the wood screws and replace them with new brackets. So the recent addition to this tripod has been a hinged plate that raises up, and there is this brass bar with holes in it, and there is a brass rod that goes through so you can lock the position at various points of tilt. And you can either tilt it down as it's mounted here, or mount the camera the other way, 180 out, and tilt it up as needed. For the shot back in 1997 at Casa Rinconada in Chaco Canyon, if I had this mounting plate, I would have mounted the camera pointing up like this, and I would have tilted it up to get a shot of that high wall with the open window. The more conventional large format like 8 by 10 box camera would be using sheet film holders. But this particular idea of mine was something that I pursued a lot back in the 1990s and aughts to try to make multiple paper negatives possible in one camera without the expediency of carrying expensive, heavy, and bulky sheet film holders. So in the case of larger formats like 8 by 8 or 8 by 10 or larger, it kind of starts to make sense to do this because the sheet film holders get to be very expensive and heavy and bulky. So if you can fit, in this case, 8 negatives into the camera, that's the equivalent of carrying 4 double-sided sheet film holders, which is a significant reduction in weight and in cost. I enjoyed using this camera. I shot a lot of pictures with it. The tripod itself, of course, was a whole nother experimental project, and I decided to marry the two together by using the box camera with the tripod when I did go to Chaco Canyon. Now, if I was going to do this today, I would probably be using, well, I was going to say I would probably be using my Bogan tripod, but it's probably barely big enough, maybe not quite rigid enough or heavy enough for this camera. So you really need a really sturdy tripod. Certainly you can buy large format tripods for cameras this big and heavy, but my concern back then and still today is trying to figure out how to make this kind of gear, try to make it a little bit more economical, but also it involves the fun of designing and building something yourself. Well, this is the equipment or hardware side of that Casa Rinconada Chaco Canyon photograph. I hope this helped you to appreciate the fact that the box camera itself can't easily be aimed, because there's not even any sighting lines or dots, which I could add, by the way. The idea of sighting lines or dots is to put a dot on the side corresponding to where the pinhole is vertically, put two dots on the back corresponding to the limits, the vertical limits of the field of view of the film itself, and you do the same on the top. And you can sight along those and estimate where the limits of the angle of view are, which is kind of how I actually exposed the photograph in Chaco Canyon. But the trick is you really don't have as good of an idea of the corners of the image. You can kind of get an idea of the sides in the middle and the top and bottom in the middle by doing viewing dots or viewing lines. But again, the corners are hard to judge. And you can see, obviously, from the photo, the corner was not composed very well. So maybe there's an opportunity to go back to Chaco Canyon in the future and retake this photo with the same camera. And if I do that, I'll be sure to take you guys along with me. Well, we had a nice rainstorm today, and it looks like there's another one rolling in on the other side of the mountain. So let's head back to the studio and finish up this video, shall we? So this is the paper negative itself. This was Ilford Multigrade RC3 paper, and it was exposed in 1997. And so you can see, like right up here, for instance, is our little corner of sky that we wish was either larger or not existent in the image, but that's just the approximate nature of the aiming system of the camera in use. I wanted to show you the negative mainly to show you what a decent paper negative should look like. A lot of people are kind of confused about that at times. The foreground, the bottom third of the image, where those rock tones look so beautiful, you can see that the tones are very clearly evident here in the image. And then over to what was the right side of the print, the left side of the negative, you'll see it goes almost paper white at the very edge, which would be almost completely black. Just a little bit of detail here. And then more detail up on top, and you can still see detail here on this side over here, fading off darker into paper white here along the edge. And then you'll notice, of course, the window itself, the sky through the window, is completely black on the print. It's maximum black. And so this is a lesson for you paper negative shooters out there, that if you are going to be exposing a pinhole camera with paper negatives, ignore the sky exposure. Don't consider it. You want to look at your subject matter as indicative of what the exposure should be. Also, you may have noticed in the shadow of the window opening up on the top of it, it was completely black, and you can see that evidenced by the completely paper white area here above the window, and then there's a little bit of detail evident right here to the left of the window. I really like the way it turned out. I think one of the reasons why the tones turned out so well, in spite of the fact that we're using the higher contrast, multi-contrast grade paper, is because this was in the shaded side of the building, of the structure. So we're shooting on the north side of the structure. So it's shaded daylight. It's going to be a lot softer in contrast, which is a lesson for us who are using multi-grade for paper negatives. Well, in theory, it shouldn't matter whether you shot the photograph with a pinhole camera or any kind of camera. The camera really shouldn't matter. What should matter with photography is the image. I've always believed that. However, I think for you to understand the image, it helps to understand the technology used to record it. At least it gives you a little bit of background information. So we'll cover another of these photographs in the near future. I have binders full of paper negative images from Pinhole cameras that would be fun to look at over the years. In any event, thank you for viewing. I appreciate your faithfulness. And as always, stay creative and have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye for now.